So, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you, all of you, Fernando, Milena, Patricio, Corina. Well, today we will talking about something that most of you should be an expert probably, but some of you are just beginners in this topic of outcome payment, outcome-based financial instruments. So we will start with a brief context. Sorry, experts, because this is very simple. This slide is very simple, and of course it's more complex than this. But for the ones that are beginners, this model is quite simple in paper. At the beginning, you need an outcome payer that most of the time is government, but can be also companies, can be NGOs, philanthropists. But what do they have in common is that they want to pay, but what it works. They want to pay just for impact, and not for other things. So they decide what result they want to achieve. They put a price on it, and then they go and find someone who wants to put venture capital to finance the service provider that should achieve the intended outcome, or part of it. No? It's not always 100%. And in this trio of factors is when you gather this trio of factors is when the outcomes models can work. But why to use them, no? There are several other ways of producing impact, so why with outcomes-based instruments? First of all, we have a lot of money. Several people already said $1.2 trillion in impact investment is a lot, but the world is still imploding. No? We have wars, we have hunger, climate crisis, and other social issues that must be tackled. And there is also impact washing and goodwill impact, no? That it's not the same, but at the end, both of them are not achieving impact. And outcomes are a light in this, in this world, because outcomes, if an outcome project, if it's well done, can equal impact, and that's a lot. They have other benefits, of course. They gather a lot of people, promote partnerships, they can save public money, they can, well, help us to gather a lot of data of what works or what don't. And that's a brief context in order to let the expert to talk about what they are doing in their own countries. So I would love to start with, I think, with Milena. It would be great to start with you and tell us, well, what you are doing around an outcome-based project, which is the instrument you are doing, and, well, which are your experience about it, please.
Thank you. And very pleased to be here in this panel. So very excited for this discussion. So I'm Milena Castelnou. I'm Chief Programs Officer at the Education Outcomes Fund. We are a hosted fund at UNICEF, and we were actually set up out of the work of the GSG and the Education Commission with the mission to bring to scale outcomes-based financing instrument in education. And so I guess the first question is why outcomes-based finance, right? And I think for us, it's very clear that the status quo is not working. So we're focusing on education, and when you look at the education programs that have been implemented, there is a study from the World Bank that shows that half of them have achieved no impact. So we really do need not only more, but also more effective funding. And so that's where this type of instrument can really bring a lot of value. And I mean, we work in particular at EOF with outcomes funds, and I can talk a little bit about it, but maybe don't know. Do you want me to continue, or should I pass the floor?
Okay, we can talk now with Patricio, because he's also involved in education programs, but in Chile. So what's your experience about it?
Well, most of the time, I'm the CFO at the Mustakis Foundation, where I've been leading the implementation of the criteria of ESG sustainability in the endowment, and also the implementation of the Impact First portfolio. I do also serve as a board member for the GSG, the National Advisory Board. I'm a member of the Strategic Council for Latimpacto. But today I'm wearing another hat. I'm wearing the hat of Bien Público, which translates to public good. It's a corporation that we have funded among 12 of the most respectable foundations in Chile. This was quite challenging since we made it during the pandemic. We made it with a clear objective, that is developing payment for results model in the country through social impact bonds. This in the pursuit to find programs with concrete impact that can be escalated to public policy, or if the outcome payers are foundations, even improving the philanthropic efficiency. In Chile, the social industry is probably the only sector where payment is made in advance, and for interventions that do not necessarily generate impact or the desired results. We from Bien Público, we have detected two problems. One of them is that social programs at public level do not achieve results. Recent studies show that 65% of the programs funded by the government have insufficient or poor evaluation. Worse yet, only 5% of these programs have a very good rating. So that is at least 65% of the resources wasted in a country where social programs represent the 16% of GDP and 30% of total social public expenditure. How does it work in the private sector? It's almost the same. The vast majority of programs do not have any impact evaluation, not even an outcomes evaluation. And most of them are programs funded by foundations that flow every year millions of dollars without an evidence or research.
Well, quite complete, so thank you, Patricio. Corina, do you want to talk about your experience, please?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Corina Gardner with...
No. It's not working.
Is it hello? Hello? No. Hello, hello? Yeah. Okay, if you can hear me.
The mic.
Okay. Hello? Okay. Hi. Thanks for coming today. IDP Foundation, we are a family foundation based out of the US, but we've been doing education financing in Ghana for 15 years. And we started out looking at what would be a financially sustainable way to support schools that are serving some of the lowest income communities. The reason for focusing on education as a philanthropy is not hard to explain. And in fact, normally when I say something about education, people very emphatically come back and explain to me why it's the most important thing that we can do. But one of the things, and that's the good news, but the bad news is that we are really failing at actually doing it appropriately. Just, indulge me just as a reminder, because while people do believe in education, a lot of times they don't know the state of where we are. And right now, if we assess learning poverty by whether or not a child's able to read at the age of 10, in sub-Saharan Africa, only 1 in 10 children will read by the age of 10 coming out of a basic school system. In Latin America, that's only 1 in 3. So we have a lot of work to do. There is a lot to be done, and it's especially if you're working in education, thinking about that early childhood years. We're talking about primary school and even earlier, and really thinking about the lower income segments as well. And I think in this impact investing space, there's a lot of love for education, but a lot of it misses out that specific bubble, which is why it's great to be here today with Education Outcome Fund and some of the others where we're looking right at those segments. One of the things that we found over 15 years of education financing, working, it's kind of like financial inclusion, but for schools that wouldn't be able to access loans, we work with local financial players, microfinance players, and help open up access to capital for school owners. Those work really well to improve infrastructure and to get working capital and to expand the schools, but what they don't do great is actually improve on the learning outcomes. And so what we found in 15 years is we're still struggling to shift that stat about how many kids are actually going to finish that school with the ability to read or the basic literacy and numeracy. And that's what's brought us to looking at more outcomes-based financing. So I'll talk about it a little bit more as we go through the panel, but we're looking more at incentive-based loans for schools serving low-income communities. And that's an instrument we're hoping is going to drive learning outcomes.
Great, thank you very much, Corina. Fernando.
Hello, good morning. I am from La Caixa Foundation. I think many things have been said about this foundation in these 2 days, It's a great pleasure being here in this morning. I've just landed in the foundation yesterday, so it's my second day. So I'm not an expert indeed. I come from the public sector because I belong to the European Commission. Well, this is my second time in the foundation, so I'm catching up actually. As you've been listening this couple of days, now we are one of the, La Caixa Foundation is the owner nowadays of the 23% of CaixaBank, which is one of the leading banks, private banks here in Spain. This is it's been an example of a very great transformation over the years, because we started in 1904 with a very small savings bank, which was a kind of very little and regional bank in the north, in the region of Catalonia here in Spain. And over the decades and over a century, we are now one of the main foundations in the world, because we apart from this, the position of the 20% of the 23% of the bank, we also have a very big industrial and financial institution, and we run a budget annually of over 565 million euros. And for our assets bring us as one of the biggest philanthropic foundation institution in the world. No, we are basically main here in Spain, and we carry out work in 3 pillars, which are the social and welfare projects, which has most of the annual budget. Also, we have a cultural science and education program, and the last one, and the newly added, is the research and biomedical pillar, which is now was the most important part when coming for the next century. No? Also, even though, as I said, we are mainly based in Spain, we also have a not very big, but very very increasing international program, and we work over there with cooperation programs on promoting global health, socioeconomic development, and educational programs to improve the living conditions for the most vulnerable in Africa, Latin America, and the Asian countries. And I think I'll go later on with our past experience with our humanitarian bond, which I think is part of the topic.
Okay. Well, I don't know, Milena, if you want to say something else, because I think it was...
No, that's okay.
It's okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so just for concluding the first question, you all have the same issues, no? Educational problems, well, and other social problems also, but you wanted to increase the amount of impact by using outcome-based financial instrument. And that's a way, it's not the only one, but it's one that is working for you. But this model do not work alone. This not depends on only on your own organizations, it depends on other stakeholders to be in the same page doing what they should do at the proper time. And that's not easy. And I can imagine that all of them have challenges. So I want to ask to you, which are your key stakeholders in order for your projects to thrive, and what are the challenges for them? Milena?
Thank you. And I guess kind of coming back maybe to talk a little bit about the instrument and coming back to the diagram you had before,
okay.
To clarify that the type of instrument that we use at EOF is called an outcomes fund, and basically what it is just a way to foster a partnership between different actors, because we know that actually solving these social and environmental challenges does require collaboration between lots of different stakeholders. And so in all of our work, governments are really at the core. We co-design the programs with government, and government co-fund it, but governments can't do it alone. So this outcomes-based financing, for us, it's a way to bring together governments, private providers, non-profit actors, investors, and for all of them to be able to solve the same challenge. And actually working under an outcomes-based financing framework is a great way to build trust, to make sure that all stakeholders are aligned towards the same results. So I think that's been one of the key kind of element of and obviously then having all of these stakeholders playing to their respective strength and being able to kind of leverage, for example, for the providers, the flexibility that they have in order to achieve greater impact. So that's, I think, just to clarify, I think that's like the main way we make this work, and so therefore we do work with a lot of different stakeholders. We have, at EOF, we have launched the 2 largest outcomes funds in education globally, in Ghana and in Sierra Leone, that are currently in implementation. So maybe I can give the example of the one in Sierra Leone to kind of talk you through how it's working and also share some initial lessons learned, because we are 1 year into implementation, so it's starting to get exciting. We're starting to see some results. So in Sierra Leone, the program is called the Sierra Leone Education Innovation Challenge. It's a program that is co-funded by the government of Sierra Leone, and the objectives were defined with the government. So the objective there is really dual. There is a direct impact that we want to achieve for 134,000 children in 325 schools throughout the country. And in terms of impact, to the point that Corinna was making, we really want to address the learning poverty. So the impact we're looking at is learning gains in literacy and numeracy. And we want to be really rigorous in the way we're assessing that. So we are assessing this with a randomized control trial. So it's a really ambitious program in that respect. And in order to achieve this objective, then we've built a coalition of partners with other funders coming on board. So in addition to the government, the program is being funded by FCDO, by the Hempel Foundation, by Bank of America, by KOICA, the South Korean Development Agency. So a coalition of partners that come together to commit funding to pay once the results are achieved. And EOF in this setup is playing an intermediary role. So we lead the design process. We then are able to contract the providers and investors, and then to oversee implementation. And because in addition to the direct impact I was mentioning, the other element of it is the systemic impact we want the program to have. And the objective there is to allow the government to test different interventions and to learn about what's working and what's not working, generate evidence, and then being able to scale up the best practices. So for that, we have selected 5 implementers, 5 different providers with very different interventions and very different structures in order to test different things. And that goes from teaching at the right level to a happiness curriculum, so different approaches. Most of these implementers don't have the upfront capital to be able to pre-finance their intervention, and that's where the role of the investor comes in. And I know there's a lot of people in this room who maybe are looking at this from the investor perspective. So the investor is there to provide the upfront capital, but also to support the implementers during the intervention. And then we contract an evaluator, verify that the results have been achieved, and disburse the funding if they have been. So that's the broad kind of structure and how it works. And now to share, I guess, coming to the interesting part, to share the preliminary results. Obviously, we're only 1 year in, and it's a 3 years program. We also know that outcomes-based financing programs normally need a little bit longer to achieve good results, and that's because precisely we want to shift the mindset away from activity to really course-correcting, problem-solving, innovation, and that's really what's going to lead to greater results. So we expect to see even greater results in the next couple of years. But in the first year, we already saw some significant positive results in math. So when we compare the children who have received the interventions with the children who have not received it in control schools, we already see a significant difference in numeracy. And I think what's even more exciting is the more qualitative insights that we're getting, this mindset shift that I was talking about. When we pay for outcomes, we're able to give a lot more flexibility to implementers to do what actually they're best placed to do, to adapt to the context and to deliver interventions that really tackle the challenges they're facing on the ground. And one example of that is that in Sierra Leone, there's a lot of prevalence of volunteer teachers in school. So in some districts of the country, about half of the teachers in schools are not on government payroll. And so what this means is that this can lead to a lot of absenteeism, a lot of transitions, etc. The providers, when they started working in the schools, their first reaction was to say, well, actually, if I just implement my activity-based program, I'm not going to achieve results because of this contextual challenge. And so they started raising this challenge, and that led to really interesting discussions with the government and other stakeholders. And then even more interestingly, the next step was to say, right, well, if this is the context and I'm being paid on the basis of the results, then how can I adapt to this context and propose creative solutions? And so, for example, one of the implementers started thinking about how can I motivate these volunteer teachers, and they started providing them with certificates when they participated in training. And then they started working with the Teaching and Service Commission, which is a government entity that is responsible for teachers, and actually found a way that these certificates could be recognized as a way for the volunteer teachers to transition onto government payroll at a later date. And this has already now been adopted by other providers in the program. And so we already are seeing some of these examples of innovation, and so that's why I'm really, really, optimistic about the results we're going to be seeing in the next couple of years. And I think that's really all the core of the instrument here.
Well, amazing results. Congrats. Patricio, we have been working in this topic for a while, but we still have a lot of challenge in Chile. So please comment on that.
Well, there are three, as you showed, there are three key stakeholders in the system. One is the service providers, then the outcome payers and investors. I do think it is a challenge because Bien Público, what does, they connect, they connect all the points. And as I mentioned before, there is a lack of evidence in social programs in Chile. So we're even thinking about doing some blended finance in the model, trying to do a philanthropic part the first year to prove the outcomes, and then to get the program or the service providers investment ready to achieve an outcome-based fund on the second year. But there is also the investors. We are working with them through a private fund that is managed by La Vial, which is one of the biggest wealth managers in Chile. The fund is still small. It's only 2 challenges right now. It's about $1.5 million. What catches our attention is the type of investor. We thought, because of our first interventions, because we have a social impact bond in 2018, that there will be very big foundations with big tickets, but it's not. It's actually 68 investors with an average ticket of $10,000. So that shows that there is another market, a new market of people that is trying to invest with impact and returns. And we think that is quite fascinating because it's very different. And we want to do it right. We want to really deliver the outcomes and really deliver the returns for them. We still haven't delivered our first round of results. We're still working on it. The programs have been alive for only 6 months right now. But as a goal, we want this initiative to be installed in the government, so that guides us to the next stakeholder, that is the outcome payer. And that's very interesting too, because there has been a challenge to get interest for the government, the central government, but we've been able to talk with regional governments and municipalities. We also have foundations as outcome payers, and more a different kind of payer, which is one of the biggest retailers in Chile, which is also paying for results. They do some philanthropy, and it made a lot of sense for them to pay for the actual results. As key maybe results for now, they are just at a system level because we haven't reached any outcomes yet. We had 13 outcome payers supporting those 2 challenges, 2 governmental entities, as I told you, one of the biggest retail holdings, 8 social service providers between these two challenges, and we're currently reaching 76 schools and more than 14,000 students. As I mentioned before, we don't have any outcomes yet, but we made a diagnostic, and the diagnostic is really bad. As an example, 2,500 kids were evaluated in reading skills, and only 120 approved the test. It was the best test that we made, and 2,400 proved it to be below the expected level of that test. So that is a really crude reality. so it makes a lot more sense to work in this or to pursue these challenges to solve them.
Thank you, Patricio. Corina, what you're looking ahead for?
Oh, I think it's working now. Yeah, so we are slightly different in our model in that we're one of the few interventions that's not working in government schools. And that is a specific decision because, one, we're a small foundation, and as a small player wanting to have big impact, you kind of look at where are you likely to be able to make a difference. And we were looking at where other philanthropy doesn't operate. And that is mostly in schools serving low-income communities that are underserved by government. Generally, the public schools are not reaching them because they're either too rural or they are a marginalized community, possibly refugees, possibly not the most popular ethnicity within a country, or just an overcrowded slum area is generally where the majority of the schools that we support are located. The downside is that we have to work really hard to work with government to see that this is a complementary set of schools and not in competition, that it's something we want government to see as included in part of their overall education system and regulated to meet minimum standards, but not in a punitive way where schools don't trust government and won't let inspectors in because they're afraid they're going to shut the school down. And so a huge part of what we do is working between schools and government to build up trust and see that there's a mutual benefit to it. And so it makes an interesting, sort of stakeholder in government. But it also opens up other opportunities that aren't there when you are working in government schools, because there is a lot of philanthropies and private sector that don't contribute to programs that are going directly into government ministries. So there's also a limitation in that. And so what we're able to do is mobilize funding from in a blended finance model from philanthropies and from private sector, both international as well as local financial players, to invest in these schools because they can accept debt, because they can actually pay back a loan, because they can be held into that sort of contractual agreement. So one of the things that we are building right now is a fund that can replicate this across sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And we are doing this off the back of, some people might be familiar with Varthana model in India, and one of the things they did across over 10,000 affordable non-state schools that they worked in was have a combination of interventions where one is a traditional development or philanthropic intervention where you pay an NGO to go in and improve the quality of the school. Another one is a traditional finance where you give them a loan and then the school owner has the money and they can figure out how to improve the school. And the third one is when you have both. So it would not surprise anybody to know the schools that get both financing plus a third party coming in and giving training have the best learning outcomes. However, if the second group that gets the best learning outcomes is financing alone. And so, in contrast to the idea of being what is often the more costly intervention, which is paying for an international NGO or even a local NGO to go in and train teachers or have a quality intervention. Actually, the cheaper one, which is a more financially sustainable one, which is to actually give a loan and let the school owner decide how they're going to improve the quality of the school, has the best outcomes. And it's on that thesis that we are looking to build this fund and to mobilize both private debt that we would then lend on to local financial institutions who then on-lend to schools. And it's a hugely impactful model because you go from potentially giving debt of $3 million, but it immediately gets converted to an average loan size of $5,000. So you're getting very local very quick, and you're getting to the schools that need it in a serious way, without a lot of administration and hands going through that sort of chain. That would be paired with a technical assistance fund that will be grant funded, and a lot of what we're looking at doing that is designing a loan product that can be deployed across multiple countries where an incentive is paid out at the end of the loan if you meet those basic learning outcomes. So if you get to the literacy targets that we would like the school to get to, and you've finished paying off your loan, you'll get your interest back, and it feels like a cash reward at the end. And that's the sort of incentive that we've seen have real success in India. I think what makes this model different and our stakeholders slightly different is two of our key stakeholders are a local financial institution, like a microfinance bank, and the local school owner. And the current models for outcomes-based contracts or social impact bonds are very complicated and have a lot of fine print, a lot of terms and conditions. These are not things that we expect somebody, a school owner who maybe didn't have a bank account, last year and is now managing their first loan ever, to understand the complexities of what sort of target they need to make. And so a lot of what we're doing is for that particular stakeholder group, we are simplifying. We want to simplify and strip everything back as much as possible. It's basically, this is just a bonus if you do good at the end of your loan. And trying to get to that level of simplicity that also meets the investor criteria and needs is our big challenge at the moment.
Bonus to do good. That's a perfect conclusion. Well, Fernando, what are you thinking in CAIXA? Do you think outcome-based projects are part of your future or not?
Yes, they are indeed. They are indeed. Yes, we're a very old-fashioned foundation now. In the past, over a century, or working with. We were the founders mostly here in the private sector here in Spain, and we had to change how we worked. And in our international area, we worked especially with call for proposals, typical 1 million per year, working with Spanish NGOs across the world and in many things now. And we came with first experience with a humanitarian impact invest program we did with the International Committee of the Red Cross, which was the startup of what we are now doing in the foundation, and I think it was a very good start. It was it was a fund created. The project was from 2017 until last year, 2022, and it was created for the construction of 3 new physical rehabilitation centers for people with disabilities in Mali, Nigeria, and Congo. No? The thing was trying to increase the access for people in need of rehabilitation and improve the overall efficiency of the centers, and also to design and test the innovative fundraising tools. No? This was a very big project. It was 20.2 million euros. The project consisted basically on staff training, the construction and the equipping of the centers, and the testing of the efficiency of improvement measures and the development of the digital tool. No? We had the outcome funders were the public sector. Sorry, was the Swiss Confederation, the Kingdom of Belgium, the Republic of Italy, and the United Kingdom, and La Caixa Foundation was the only private sector partner of this project. No? Our social investor was co-sponsored by Lombard Odier in Switzerland, and also by NIRE in Munich, Rime Group. They were based in the assurance that the outcome funders will pay the Red Cross in 5 years, and the social investors will make their investments. No? And in La Caixa we granted 1 million, and which was delivered in 2020, when the 3 rehabilitation centers were built. This is already finished, as I told you, last year, and for us, I think this bond has shown us it's been a very powerful tool to diversify our funding for a large-scale, multi-year project. And I think from the outset of the program, the Red Cross partnered with the future owners and the operators on the 3 planned rehabilitation centers, which are set for the one in Mali with the Minister of la Solidarité, and in Nigeria with the university, and also in the Minister for Health in Congo. No? But and in the end of this program, no, the measurement of this is that the performance measure was of 1.09, resulted in a repayment of the total amount invested by the social investors, unfortunately without additional financial return. But I think we can be very proud of this experience, no? And also, what comes also to an end is that this project met the objectives, and more than 3,000 people have already had access to physical rehabilitation services in these centers. Also, we contracted the centers, and before the implementation of the project, some of the users, in fact, of the Nigerian center, went to another center located 600 kilometers from their home. So I think this is our first milestone, and now we are working on 3 new projects with social investment, which will be hopefully for the next summit catch up.
Everyone hopes. Well, it's amazing what you have done, of course, and summarizing what you did is to define an outcome-based financial instrument in the context, not you're living and you're working with the people you're working with. So for all of you here, you must know that there is an outcome-based financial instrument waiting for you. You just need to understand the problem, the right stakeholders, and the best instrument. You can use at sometimes social impact bonds or development impact bonds. You can use outcome-based contracts. You can use an outcome fund, debt. So you can choose equity, debt. So it's quite amazing all the information and the things that happen around the partnerships that focus on the outcome. And at the end of the project, as you can listen to, thanks to our panelists, the outcomes can be achieved. And that's something that not many people can say, not governments can say. So it's not the only way. It's one way to do things. It's a good way to innovate. And as some of you said, when you have that program, that project that works, well, government can come and scale up to go to the total population. So it's a good way to experiment. And I hope every one of you in the next summit has better good news and more news for our ecosystem. So now I want to offer come on.
First of all, thank you for all that. My name is Nat Ware. I'm from Forte, which is a new model of outcomes-based financing focused on education. One of the key challenges in this space is just scalability, both in terms of not relying on concessionary returns and, as was alluded to, massively reducing the transaction costs associated with these arrangements. So I was wondering, how are you approaching that question of scalability? If we look 5-10 years from now, if this is 1,000 times, 10,000 times bigger, what are the key things that would have caused that to be the case?
Who wants to start?
I'm happy to. No, I think it's a really good question, and actually that was really at the core of EOF when we were set up, that we wanted to move away from small pilots. I think there's still this idea that outcomes-based financing is something new, something innovative, and that we need to test it at small scale. But actually it has been tested again and again, right? It has really shown its potential, and that now it's really time to move to a larger scale. And I actually think that scale is one of the answers to the transaction cost challenge, because a lot of the cost involved in designing and even overseeing the implementation of an outcomes-based financing program are quite fixed. You might have, evaluation cost can increase with scale, but, aside from that, everything, designing a program that will reach 500 beneficiaries or 500,000 beneficiaries will have a very similar level of effort. So the greater the scale, the better the value for money. And I think that really for us is something key, and that's why all the programs we launch are all large-scale programs. So the program I was talking about in Sierra Leone, it's an $18 million program. In Ghana, we've launched a $30 million program. So really looking for scale there. And then the other element is that we learn, and as we learn, we become more efficient. We will adapt the design of our programs, and we will do it in a way that becomes much faster. And so we can even see the difference at EOF between the first program we designed in Ghana and the second one in Sierra Leone. The design time was much faster. And now we're working with the government of Sierra Leone on a second program in early childhood education, and this is going even faster because the government is more familiar with the instrument. And so we're learning, we are improving our processes and becoming, better, faster, and our partners are learning. And so I would think that when you look at, the ecosystem in 10 years' time, this issue of transaction cost hopefully will not be as big of a challenge as it is today, because we will have launched programs at a much larger scale, and because the ecosystem will be a lot more mature, and so it will not be as costly to design them.
Yeah, I might just add on that as sort of the complementary, because I think scale equals government most of the time, because government is by far the top financer and provider of education. And so just picking up on the sort of non-government side, which is the other part that we complement there, which is in the lower income the country, the bigger percentage it is of the education system. So low income countries tend to be like 40%. As you kind of go up into middle income countries, it's closer to 20% of children that are in non-state. But one of the things that we're looking at is the benefit of working within, sort of a private financing arrangement is you can really reduce the requirements for that learning assessment or the outcomes assessment that you're looking at. Partially because you're not working with tax dollars. Tax dollars require a lot of extra rigor in order to make sure that you're really getting what you require. Partially because we're not backing one particular quality intervention to say that this intervention of teacher training was better value for money and had better impact than others. We're putting all of those decisions in the hands of the education entrepreneur that started their school. And as long as we can make sure that the assessments are credible and they're not doctored results and they actually are children learning, then how they got there is less important to us. And I think we see an ability to scale that pretty quickly in multiple countries. So just hitting that sort of third of non-state education that's hopping around in countries in different regions.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Greg Spencer. I run an impact marketplace called Common Good Marketplace. My background is in carbon as a project developer, so a lot of what I say is probably influenced by carbon. But I think this is an amazing topic that needs more attention in terms of the capital stack and blended finance and how do we direct more capital to verified outcomes. So love the topic. My question is around pricing outcomes. In terms of kind of the traditional, here's the cost per beneficiary for this outcome versus the value that's been created. And for us, so a group like Luminos Fund or Imagine Worldwide, if we're looking at their cost per outcome, they're really efficient because they're using tablets to enable ICT skills and learning in classrooms, but that could be $50 versus they could be creating $500 net present value, for that individual student. And so the question is just how you approach pricing outcomes, and then also thinking about a broader ecosystem and marketplace for outcome payers, rather than, I think, Karina, you mentioned just the complexities of an impact bonds and how complicated that can be, the terms. Whereas creating kind of a bigger marketplace where you could have a government, a foundation, a corporate, who are all paying for the same outcomes, rather than very structured instruments that are hard to comply or execute. So kind of two parts to that question. The first one, pricing outcomes, and then how do you see building a broader marketplace and ecosystem for paying for outcomes? So thank you.
Great question, because also we'll answer part of the first one. So who wants to start?
I mean, I'll just quickly jump in again, just talking about a subset of non-government schools. It's one of the things we're excited about is actually letting the market decide what the price of an intervention could be. So we look at it as, I mean, just from Go, we look at it, if I said the example is $5,000 per school for an annual loan as the average loan size, they're still going to need some basic infrastructure. They're still going to need to spend some of that on toilets and updating, you know, some of the basic safety. So if 50% of that can go into a quality intervention, then we're going to guess that right now a school can afford to pay somewhere around, you know, $2,500 per year on something that's going to improve learning outcomes. That is our hypothesis. That is not proven. I don't have evidence around that. That is what we're looking at. But right now, what we don't know is what that price is, because generally the payer is a big philanthropist or a CSR or somebody else, or, you know, and so that's in the non-state what we've seen, and what we're kind of trying to simplify so that we can get to the point where we know what is a school, and the parents who pay fees to that school, what are they willing to pay to get to those outcomes. I think it's very different on the, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's, we could have this discussion for a long time. It's fascinating, but I think so. I guess the first thing is in the case of EOF, in order to actually reduce this kind of work and burden on all these different actors in the ecosystem to figure it out, our role is to pool funding from different funders and donors and actually, you know, do this work. And so, I guess to your second question, the question of pricing, I think there's lots of different ways of approaching it. I think I would send it back to what objectives are you trying to achieve with a specific program? And, you know, are you trying to, in lots of high-income context, a lot of these kind of impact bond models have focused on cost saving as a way of pricing outcomes. But I think the point you're bringing around the social value that's being created is a really interesting one. That definitely should be explored more. And then on the other hand, you have also the financial constraints, right? So when we are thinking, for example, like I was talking about the Sierra Leone program that we're at the moment implementing, the systemic objective for the government is to be able to identify the most cost-effective practices that they can scale up. If that's their objective, then actually it's no use to anyone to be testing interventions that cost $500 per child, even if they achieve great impact, because this would never be scalable. So what we did is that we put a maximum cost per child, and then we got the market to bid on these results, on these kind of budgets. So, you know, trying to find creative ways of addressing, you know, both the objective of the program and the context in which you're operating. And when you're working in low and middle income context, you really are faced with the challenge of very low and inaccurate data. And so I think the idea of an outcomes marketplace makes a lot of sense, and hopefully is where the market will evolve. But we're still a very long way from it when you're working in a country like Sierra Leone or Rwanda. And we need to first, I think, generate more evidence around what is the cost of achieving these outcomes before we can, you know, get to a place where we know exactly how much it should cost and have like rate cards and, you know, other instruments like that. And Emily, who is sitting on the first row, would be the right person to talk to you about the cost effectiveness piece as well, doing a lot of work at Brookings on that. I think it's really critical to be able to collect data on the impact that can be achieved, as well as the cost that, you know, is incurred to achieve that, so that over time we can get to a more mature place. Yeah.
But we are in the same road, no? It's a challenge for all public policies and social programs to understand what they are generating, what's the value that they have, and what's the cost that they are saving for public sector. So we're in the same direction. So we are gathering data in order to answer your question in the next summit, hope.
Thanks very much for the interesting talk. I'm Stuart Theobald from a consultancy, Crutham, and we're setting up a $17 million outcomes fund for youth unemployment in South Africa. I have a related question to the pricing one, which is, how do you engage the market when you are seeking implementation partners, and what information do you give them? So, Manana, you mentioned putting in a maximum cost per child. I think that's very interesting. Do you also look at target numbers of children? What detail do you give the market, and what outcomes you're expecting them to be providing you, rather than just allowing the market to be innovative and seeing where the market clears with what kinds of information you get from it?
Yeah, I think maybe, I think it depends on how mature the market is. In an ideal world, you would just be able to put it out to the market and say, these are the outcomes I want to achieve, give me your targets, give me your price, and, let's have a competitive bid. But when you're working in context where actually providers are not used to being paid for outcomes, they might not have the right information. So it's actually quite a collaborative process to get there. We have a lot of engagement with potential providers along the way. And actually, one thing that's been really interesting is to see that there's so much appetite from the provider market. And I don't know if this is something you're also seeing when you're talking to the schools about, the results-based loans and things like that. That you might think that providers would be worried about getting involved in these type of models, but actually, on the contrary, there's a lot of interest in that because the idea of the flexibility of being able to implement and use the funding the way that they see fit. Is actually a very appealing one. And so that hasn't really been a challenge. But yeah, it is a very collaborative process, at least on our end.
Okay, we're closing. So just for summarizing the last question, what we are offering to service providers or to impact investors, to outcome payers, is impact. So, and that's something that I think we should put on paper. Investors are looking for projects that generates impact, but not always can really understand in an objective way what they have done. So I think that's what we're trying to do, to make outcome equal to impact. And if we do that, probably this market will rise in the future. So thank you, all of you, for giving us your experience, and thank you for being here.